Cascadia Subduction Zone, a gigantic earthquake that will kill thousands and change the world as we know it, could happen any day now. Cascadia Subduction Zone will happen because of how the Earth works, all the way down to its core. As you may know, the Earth is split into different layers. The first layer, the one closest to the center of the Earth, is called the inner core. The next layer is called the outer core, and then the mantle. After the mantle, there is the crust. The Earth's crust is split into fragments that are manipulated by the heat of the mantle. These fragments, or plates, are split into two different categories. These categories are oceanic and continental crust. Oceanic crust is thin, dark, and young. By contrast, the continental crust is very thick, it is light in hue, and it is very old. We live on continental crust. Cascadia Subduction Zone, the gigantic earthquake that will kill thousands, will occur on the Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire is a string of volcanoes and earthquakes that occur along a ring that goes around the Pacific Ocean and its plate. The reason that the ring exists is because the Pacific plate is pushing outwards in all directions and hitting into other plates. This impact causes earthquakes along with the creation and eruption of volcanoes. The manipulation of the crust of the Earth is not a recent thing. In fact, it has been going on since the beginning of the Earth itself. Scientists, over the years, have found ways to track how the movement of the plates affects how the Earth looks. They have determined what they believe the Earth looked like many thousands of years ago. As you can see, the Earth's continental crust started out being scrunched together, and over time, as the plates moved, the Earth broke apart and became what we know it as today. Even now, the Earth is changing, and in a couple thousand years, it will look nothing like it does today. Cascadia Subduction Zone will have some of the most intense shaking ever recorded in history, with estimates saying it will be over a 9.0 earthquake. This number may not seem bad at first, but the scale is out of 10, and for every 1 point it goes up, the power increases exponentially. This may be hard to imagine, so as an example, if a 3.9 earthquake was a grain of sand, a 6.0 would be 3,000 grains of sand. An 8.0 would be 3 million grains of sand, or about 18 pounds. A 9.0, which Cascadia most likely will be, would be 30 million grains of sand. That weighs about 970 pounds. These are insane numbers, and hopefully they will make you realize how dangerous Cascadia Subduction Zone will be. To help better prepare ourselves, I have come up with plans that, if we follow, will help us get through Cascadia. These plans take many things into account, for example, if we are at home or at school or at work. The first two plans are two variations of a 2-minute plan. These plans are for during the shaking and a bit after. The first of the two plans is for if we all are at home. If we are all at home when Cascadia hits, the most important thing to do is to protect yourself. Once the shaking starts, try to get into a safe place, such as under a table or bed. Try to avoid tables that are near windows, as they are most likely going to break due to the earthquake, and you don't want to get showered in glass. If you are in a room that doesn't have any tables or beds or desks, try to get to a doorway. If you truly have nothing to hide under, get to a spot in a room with nothing, such as lights, above you. After the initial shaking, there will most likely be a short pause before the second and more dangerous shaking happens. The first shaking will be up and down shaking, and the second will be left to right shaking. If you are not very close to a door, stay in your protected spot, and if you are not in a safe spot, get to the nearest safe and protected spot. The safest spot in our entire house is under the coffee table in the TV room. This is because there aren't many windows close by, and there aren't any shelves nearby for things to fall off of. The most dangerous place in our house is most likely the dining room, as there are a ton of windows and shelves that things could fall off of. If you are home alone when Cascadia hits, follow the same procedures during the shaking. Once the shaking is over, however, try to contact the rest of us to tell us that you are at home. The second of the 2-minute plans is for if we are at school or work when Cascadia hits. If you are at school or work when Cascadia hits, the first priority is to protect yourself and your head. This plan is very similar to the home version of the 2-minute plan. If you can, try to hide under a desk or table and be wary of the windows as they will most likely break. Once the first wave of shaking is over, try to get outside if you are close to a door to the outside. Otherwise, just stay in your safe spot or move to an even safer spot for the second wave of shaking. I have also made 2 plans for the first 2 hours after the initial shaking. The first is for if we are at home when Cascadia hits. After both of the waves of shaking are over, we should ensure that all of us are safe and unharmed, including the cats, and then ensure that the house hasn't sustained too much damage. We should then retrieve the Cascadia kit from the garage. We should turn off the gas, electricity, and water, and then collect the water left in the pipes in the bathtub, sinks, toilets, and etc., as water is very important for survival. If the windows are broken, which they most likely will be, we should tape sheets over them to keep the house slightly warmer. We should then prepare our TV room if it's winter, because it has a fireplace, and if it's winter when Cascadia happens, we need to stay warm. To prepare the room, we should gather all the blankets and pillows and put them into the room, along with the food and the water bottles. We should also go check on Annika and her family to make sure that they're okay. The second 2-hour plan is for if we are at work or school. If we are at school or work when Cascadia happens, after the shaking is over, we should first evacuate the building, and then we should call each other to make sure that we're all okay. If we're all okay, we should all try to meet up at the church. Once we're at the church, we should walk home, as there could be damage to the roads that make them impossible to drive on, as well as trees that have most likely fallen down over the road. Once we reach the house, we should turn off the gas first, then the electricity and water. We should then fill up the tub, toilets, bowls, bottles, and etc. with water. We should make sure that the cats are okay, and then get the Cascadia kit from the garage, and then set up the TV room. We should also go check up on Annika and her family to make sure that they're all right. If, after the shaking, we are not all okay, we should instead go to the person who got hurt and then help them get home. Once we get home, we should get the first aid kit and do everything we can to help them get better. As someone is treating the hurt person, the other people should shut off the gas, electricity, and water and fill up the tub, toilets, bowls, and etc. We should check on the cats and get the Cascadia kit from the garage. We should continue to set up the TV room and check on Annika and her family to make sure that they're okay. The final plan is for the 18 days following Cascadia. We should start by eating the food in the fridge that will go bad quicker and move back towards the nuts and canned food that will last a lot longer. For the water that we should have in the Cascadia kit, we should have a gallon for every person for every day of the 18 days. This doesn't include how much water we think we can get from the pipes, because we can't count on that. This adds up to, for us, 4 gallons per day, which adds up to 72 gallons of water in total, and we should add 2 extra gallons for the cats. As for food, we currently don't have any directly in the kit. This could be fine, as we usually have food in the house, but just in case, we should add in a couple of energy bars and nuts, as they'll last for a long time and will provide us with calories. We should also have a first aid kit in our survival kit. In our first aid kit, we should at least have sterile bandages, adhesive bandages, cloth tape, aspirin, non-latex gloves, gauze pads, tweezers, and a thermometer. We should keep the first aid kit with the survival kit and water in the garage. For doing our business, we do not want to use our toilets as they contain very fresh and drinkable water. Instead, we should go into the forest near our house and do our business there. We should try not to do it to where if it were to rain, it would be flowing in our direction. Instead, we should do it in a ditch or a downward slope away from our house. If, for whatever reason, the house is uninhabitable, we should try to stay with our friends, such as Ani and her family. In conclusion of the 18-day plan, we should set ourselves up in our TV room as it'll be the warmest room in the house during the winter. We should ration our food and water, and wait it out for about 18 days as that's the maximum amount of time it should take for help to come to Eugene. We will have it much easier than many other places. Eugene is not in as much trouble as some of the other towns in Oregon. The majority of coastal towns will be completely destroyed in Cascadia. With our house, the worst thing it has going for it is that we have a risk of landslides during Cascadia. This is nothing compared to some of the coastal towns. Take Seaside, for example. Their experience will be much worse than ours. Seaside, Oregon is going to experience very violent shaking during Cascadia, as well as a tsunami not long after the shaking is done. The inhabitants of Seaside expect a tsunami to happen 25 minutes after the initial shaking. With this short period of time to evacuate and the fact that the bridges will most likely break during the earthquake, some residents will take 97 minutes to evacuate to a safe spot, at which point it'll be too late. Seaside predicts that if the bridges are to collapse, over 3,700 people will die in Seaside alone from the tsunami. That's about 56% of their population. Even if, by some miracle, the bridges stay intact, the tsunami will still kill over 1,000 people, which is about 17% of their population. Seaside will have it relatively safe when it comes to landslides, with there only being a couple of spots that could possibly have landslides. Seaside will, unfortunately, have a very high chance of liquefaction all over it. Liquefaction happens when there is water in the ground. When the shaking happens, the water temporarily comes up and buildings and other things sink into the ground. Then, when the shaking stops, the ground solidifies and traps the building in the ground. Here is a model of liquefaction. We, thankfully, will not have to deal with liquefaction, but we do have a very high chance of a landslide happening under our house. We will also experience strong shaking, which means that books will most likely fall off shelves and dishes as well. The windows will also most likely break because they can't flex and bend. The shaking will most likely not be strong enough to break our house, but we should see cracks in the roof and foundation, though they shouldn't be too bad. One big problem is that there are trees around our house. These trees could fall over and break our house. The dangers to us and our house pale in comparison to the dangers of Seaside, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stay prepared and be ready for when it happens. For all we know, it could happen right now. At least you'd be educated about it. It would suck if it happened halfway through and you didn't know what to do. Now, to lighten your mood, here's a fun skit about how we're all gonna die in Cascadia Subduction Zone.
Anything in the near future?
Yes, I see something. Something dark. Something. It's terrible.
What? What is it?
Death looms above you like a vulture prepared to strike. Disaster will fall and nobody will be safe from the impending doom. You and everyone else will burn with the ashes of the dying world, and the planet as we know it will be shaken to its core. Nobody will rise from the broken remains of...
Okay, we get it.
Where were we?
I'm gonna die? How?
Not yet, anyways, but as I was saying, Cascadia Subduction Zone. Look at the data. Hold this. So what's happening here is the Wanda Fuca plate is subducting under the North American plate, and when enough stress builds up, then there's going to be a huge earthquake, and we're all going to die. Subduction is when one plate is sliding underneath another plate, getting closer to the mantle. The same thing forms the Cascade Range, because when the Wanda Fuca plate gets closer to the mantle, it melts, becomes magma, rises up, and makes the string of active volcanoes that form the Cascades.
When is this gonna happen?
Need I explain further? I have a life, you know. Right. As you can see here, there are many recorded instances of the Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquakes in our history. The oldest one dates all the way back to 8000 BCE, and the most recent one was in the year 1700 CE.
So wait, when is this gonna happen?
The earthquakes happen on an average of every 246 years, and as I said, the last one was in the 1700s, over 300 years ago, because apparently you can't do simple addition, so we're overdue.
Wait, so it can happen at literally any second?
We're all gonna die! Exactly my point! We will all burn! Anyway, yes, it could happen any moment, and there is a 30% chance it will happen in the next 50 years, but as you can see here, sometimes the earthquakes happen 700 years apart, while other times they were right on top of each other, so we can't really be sure when it'll happen.
So I'm not gonna die.
Well, like Chad says, we're all gonna die anyways.